The first human band, the shared origins of all humanity. Please let us know in the comments where you are watching this history video and what time you are watching it. And be sure to subscribe to our channel for more history videos in the future. Let your mind gently drift now, settle deeper into the quiet, and travel with me slowly, softly, back across the vast river of time. Imagine the years melting away like morning mist, 200,000, 300,000 years. Until the world around you softens into the ancient heart of Africa. The air is warm and heavy with the scent of rain-soaked grass. Far-off thunder rumbles like a distant lullaby. Rivers wind lazily through wide green valleys, and in this soft, endless landscape something extraordinary is quietly beginning. You should know that this moment, this quiet gathering of the very first small bands of people who were truly like us, is the single most important event in all of human history. Not because of grand battles or towering monuments, but because everything we are, every kindness, every story, every shared meal, every child who ever laughed under the stars flows directly from the gentle choices made by these first small groups. Without their quiet decision to stay together, to share everything, to care for one another through long nights and uncertain days, none of us would be here. Every human voice that has ever whispered, sung, or prayed began in their soft conversations around flickering fires. Every hand that has ever held another began in their simple reaching out. This is where humanity itself was born, not in noise or conquest, but in the steady rhythm of shared breath and shared life. Picture it now, you are there, resting safely in the tall grass. The sun is low and golden. A small band of people moves slowly across the savanna. They are not rushing, they never rush. Their steps are measured, their voices low and calm. These are the earliest ones whose bodies and minds carried the spark that would become all of us. Scientists who study the deep past tell us they appeared around 300,000 years ago, their forms gradually taking shape across different corners of Africa, in the north near what we now call Morocco, in the east near the Great Lakes, in the south where wide wetlands shimmered like mirrors under the sky. There was no single sudden beginning, only a slow flowering, a gentle coming together of older ways of living into something new, something recognizably human. Let yourself settle deeper into this scene. Feel the warm earth beneath you. Hear the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds. These first people did not arrive alone or suddenly. They emerged from even older ancestors who had already learned to walk upright, to shape simple stone tools, to watch the stars and the seasons. But something shifted in them. Their faces became smoother, their foreheads higher, their eyes softer with the light of deeper awareness. And in that shift, the need for one another grew stronger than ever before. Small family clusters that once wandered separately began to feel the pull of something larger, a quiet understanding that safety, warmth, and tomorrow itself depended on staying close. How did this first true band form? Drift with me a little further and we will see it together, slowly, without hurry. Imagine scattered groups of perhaps 8 or 10 people, a mother with her children, an elder uncle, a few strong young walkers moving across the land in search of ripe figs, fresh water, and the occasional gift of meat from a careful hunt. Life was not easy in those ancient days. The climate sometimes turned dry and harsh, rivers shrank, animals moved unpredictably. A single person alone could not survive for long. But when these small family threads began to cross paths at waterholes and shady groves, something beautiful and quiet happened. They did not fight, they did not drive one another away. Instead, they paused, they watched, and they chose to walk together. One group would share the shade of an acacia tree. Another would offer a handful of gathered roots. A child would smile at a child from the other family. And in that simple exchange, the first band began to take shape. It was not planned in grand meetings. It was not forced, it grew naturally, like roots finding one another underground. Over weeks and months, these wandering threads wove themselves into a single small circle of perhaps 25 to 40 souls. They learned each other's names, soft sounds that would one day become language. They learned each other's rhythms, who walked steadily, who sang while gathering, who had the gentlest hands for tending wounds. They chose campsites together near reliable water and good stone for tools. And in choosing one another, they became something new, the first true human band. You can almost hear their quiet voices now as the day fades. They sit in a loose circle under the stars. No one shouts commands, no one hoards. The simple understanding already lives in their bones. What one finds, all may eat. What one knows, all may learn. This is how the band was born, not through power, but through the gentle recognition that together they were safer, warmer, and more alive. The land itself seemed to breathe easier when they moved as one. Let your breathing slow even more now. Feel the peace of that ancient evening. These first people carried in their hearts the same quiet wonders we still carry today. They watched the same moon rise. They felt the same soft wind on their skin. And they understood, without needing words for it yet, that the greatest strength was not in standing alone, but in standing side by side. Every tool they shaped together, every child they raised together, every danger they faced together, these were the first threads of the vast human story that would one day wrap around the entire world. But there is more to see here, more to feel before we rest. The world they stepped into was still wild and generous in its own quiet way. Great herds of antelope moved like slow rivers across the plains. Elephants trumpeted in the distance. Lions watched from golden grass, yet rarely challenged a group that moved and called out together. The first band learned the land's secrets, which roots could ease pain, which leaves made the best bedding, which stones held the sharpest edge when struck just so. They learned the turning of seasons not from calendars, but from the flowering of trees and the flight of birds. And always, always they returned to one another at the end of each day. This sharing was not a rule written in stone. It was simply the way life felt right. A hunter who returned with meat would sit quietly while others gathered close. No one took more than they needed. No one was left hungry while another was full. The children moved freely between families, learning from every adult voice. The elders were cared for with the same gentle hands that once cared for them. In this way, the band became more than a collection of individuals. It became a living thing, breathing, remembering, hoping, the very first heartbeat of what we would one day call humanity. You should know why this matters so deeply. Every empire that ever rose, every city that ever glowed with lights, every song ever sung, all of it rests on the simple choice those first people made to stay together and share everything. Without their quiet cooperation, the long chain of generations would have broken long ago. We carry their decision inside our very blood. Our brains are wired for the same gentle reaching out. Our hearts still feel warmest when we share. This first band is not some distant curiosity. It is the quiet beginning of you, of me, of every person who has ever loved or been loved. Drift a little deeper now. The fire they built is small and steady, its light dancing softly on familiar faces. The band has chosen a sheltered spot for the night, a curve of hillside that blocks the wind, near a stream whose gentle murmur soothes tired minds. They have eaten together, they have told simple stories through gestures and sounds that would one day become words. Children curl against parents and aunts and uncles. Someone hums a low, repeating melody older than memory, and in this circle of warmth, the group feels complete. This is how the first human band formed, not in a single dramatic moment, but in 1,000 quiet choices to walk together, to wait for the slowest, to offer water to the thirsty, to smile at a stranger who felt strangely familiar. It was the birth of trust. It was the birth of belonging, and from that belonging everything else would gently grow. The night deepens now, the stars wheel slowly overhead, and the band rests. Their breathing becomes one breathing. Their dreams begin to mingle. Tomorrow they will walk again, but never alone. The group has been born, the sharing has begun, and the long, beautiful story of humanity has taken its first steady, peaceful steps. Rest here with them for a moment, feel the safety of that ancient circle, let the years between us dissolve completely. Because tomorrow, when we continue, we will look more closely at the gentle numbers within this first band, how many walked together, how the men and women lived side by side in equal quiet strength, how they cared for one another so completely that nothing was ever truly owned by one alone. We will see how long such a way of life endured, flowing like a deep river through thousands upon thousands of years. The night has passed quietly. The first faint light of dawn now touches the tops of the tall grasses. The band begins to stir, slow and unhurried, exactly as they always have. No one calls out sharply. No one hurries anyone else. They simply wake together, breathe together, rise together. The The small fire from last night is only gray ash now, but its warmth still lingers in the earth beneath their sleeping mats of woven grass and soft leaves. One by one they stretch, greet the new day with quiet sounds, soft hums, gentle touches on shoulders, small smiles pass like shared water. This is how every morning begins for them, in calm connection, never alone. Let yourself settle once more into their rhythm, feel the cool morning air on your skin, hear the soft splash as someone dips a hand into the nearby stream to drink. The first human band is awake now, and in their waking we can begin to see more clearly the gentle numbers that held them together, the actual sizes, the balance of lives, the quiet mathematics of survival that allowed humanity's long story to unfold. Scientists who study the deep bones and the ancient stones tell us, after many careful years of looking, that these earliest bands of people who carried our modern form usually numbered between 25 and 40 individuals. Rarely fewer than 20, rarely more than 50. That sweet range, 25 to 40, was not chosen by accident. It was discovered by living. Smaller than 20 and the group became too fragile. One serious injury, one long illness, one bad season of little food, and the whole circle could break. Larger than 50 and the delicate web of knowing everyone, trusting everyone, remembering everyone's face and voice and needs began to fray. Faces became strangers. Voices became harder to recognize in the dark. Sharing became less instinctive, more calculated. 25 to 40 felt exactly right, like the size of a large extended family that still fits around one fire, where every story is known, every child is watched by many eyes, every adult is cared for by many hands. Picture them now as the morning light grows stronger. Count them slowly with me, not in haste, but gently, the way one might count stars appearing at dusk. There are 28 today. Sometimes the number drifts to 31 when a young woman returns after wandering with her new partner from a neighboring band. Sometimes it falls to 26 when an elder slips peacefully away in sleep and the group spends days quietly remembering. But the center always holds around that quiet 30. 30 people breathing the same air, 30 pairs of feet walking the same paths, 30 hearts beating in loose, gentle time with one another. Within this circle, the balance between men and women was almost even, never perfectly equal from day to day, because life is never perfectly equal but remarkably close across the long seasons. Usually 14 to 16 women, 12 to 14 men. The slight tilt toward women in many bands came from the simple reality of birth and care. Mothers carried new life, and when a child arrived, the group naturally welcomed more hands to help hold, feed, watch, and love that child. Yet no one counted heads with suspicion. No one measured worth by numbers. The men and women moved through their days in deep partnership, equal in voice around the fire, equal in decisions about where to walk next, equal in the sharing of every root, every piece of meat, every drop of water carried from the stream. Drift closer now, see how they gather in the soft morning light. A few of the women sit together, weaving fresh carrying straps from tough plant fibers, their fingers moving in the same slow rhythm their mothers once taught them. Nearby, two men strike stones together with practiced care, shaping new edges for cutting and scraping. Children weave between them all, laughing softly, touching faces, being lifted without question onto shoulders or laps. No child belongs only to one mother or one father. Every adult is aunt, uncle, protector, teacher. This is the unspoken law of the band. What is mine is ours. What is ours is enough for all. And because everything was shared so completely, the band could endure in ways no single person ever could. When one hunter returned empty-handed after following game trails for 2 long days, no one turned away or judged. Instead, others quietly offered what they had gathered: tubers roasted in the coals, berries picked at first light, marrow cracked open from bones saved from yesterday. When a woman's milk was slow to come after birth, other women who still nursed offered their own breasts without hesitation or shame. When an elder's teeth wore too smooth to chew tough meat, younger teeth chewed it first, softening it gently before passing it over. This sharing was not generosity in the way we sometimes think of it today, as something extra, something given when one has more than enough. It was necessity made beautiful. It was survival woven so tightly with love that the two could no longer be separated. Let the scene unfold even more slowly now. Watch as they prepare to move. They do not pack in frantic haste. They roll sleeping mats of woven grass and hide scraps, tie small bundles of dried roots and medicinal leaves, fill gourds and ostrich eggshells with water from the stream. Every task is done together, quietly. A man helps an older woman tie her bundle more securely. A young woman carries water for an elder man whose steps have grown slower. Children run ahead a little, then circle back to make sure no one is left behind. The band never fragments. They move as one soft tide across the landscape, always within easy calling distance, always within sight of the slowest walker. This way of moving and sharing allowed the group to last far longer than any single lifetime. The first true human bands did not flicker and vanish after a generation or two. They flowed forward decade after decade, century after century, through wet seasons and dry seasons, through times when the herds were thick and times when the land grew quiet and hard. Some bands merged gently with others when paths crossed and trust grew. Some divided peacefully when the land could no longer hold them all comfortably, each new group carrying the same quiet rules of sharing forward. But the way of life itself, the commitment to stay close, to share everything, to care for every member as though they were blood, remained almost unchanged for tens of thousands of years. Scientists who read the stories written in ancient teeth and bones tell us this way of living endured with only the gentlest shifts from roughly 300,000 years ago until as recently as 40,000 or even 30,000 years ago in many places. That is 260,000 years. 260,000 years of small bands holding fast to one another. 260,000 years of refusing to let anyone walk alone for long. 260,000 years during which the deepest pattern of human life was not competition or hoarding, but quiet, steady sharing. Feel that length of time now, not as a number to hurry past, but as a soft, endless river carrying everything we are. Every laugh you have ever heard, every hand you have ever held. Every story whispered at bedtime, all of them trace their beginning to these small circles that refused to break. The band lasted because it was built on the simplest, strongest truth. We are safer together, warmer together, more fully alive together. The sun is higher now, the grasses shimmer with heat. The band walks on in their calm, unhurried line. A baby nurses quietly against its mother's chest while she walks. An elder points toward distant trees heavy with fruit, and soft sounds of agreement ripple through the group. They will reach that grove by evening if they keep this gentle pace. No one is impatient. No one is afraid of being left behind. The sharing continues with every step. The sun has climbed a little higher now. Its light filters through the thin leaves of the acacia trees ahead, casting long, soft shadows that move slowly across the ground like gentle fingers. The band continues walking in that same unhurried line, never stretched thin, never bunched too close, each person aware of the others without needing to look back every moment. A child's small hand slips into an elder's larger one for a few steps, then releases again to chase a butterfly that drifts lazily past. No one corrects the child, no one calls sharply. The butterfly is allowed its freedom, and so is the child. This is the quiet freedom that lives inside a band where everything is already shared. Let your own breathing match theirs now, slow, even peaceful. We have seen how the first bands held between 25 and 40 souls, how men and women stood almost even in number, how the simple act of sharing every bite and every drop kept them alive through countless seasons. Now drift a little deeper with me into the heartbeat of their days, the gentle, repeating patterns of tasks and moments that made the sharing feel as natural as breathing itself. There were no written rules, no spoken laws carved into bark or bone, yet the division of what needed doing flowed so smoothly that it almost seemed the land itself had taught them how. In the early light, before the heat rose too high, the gathering began. Usually it was the women and older girls who moved outward first, not because any voice had ordered it, but because their eyes were already trained on the small signs. The color of ripening fruit, the bend of a stem heavy with seeds, the faint tracks of tubers just beneath the surface. They carried woven baskets or hides slung over shoulders, and as they walked they sang softly, low, repeating sounds that rose and fell like the wind through grass. The songs were not performances. They were memory aids, maps sung into the air. Which grove held the sweetest figs this moon? Which patch of ground softened after rain and gave up its roots more easily? Children trailed behind or ran ahead, imitating the songs, learning without being taught. The men and older boys often moved in a wider, looser arc, watching for movement in the tall grass, listening for the snap of a twig under hoof, feeling the air for the faint musk of animals nearby. They carried thrusting spears tipped with carefully shaped stone points, but these were not weapons raised in anger against one another. They were tools for coaxing life from the land when the land offered it. A man might pause, crouch, study a trail of fresh dung, then make a soft clicking sound with his tongue, not loud, just enough to draw attention. Others would drift closer without hurry. No one claimed the hunt as his alone. If the animal was taken, the meat belonged to everyone from the first cut. And here is the quiet miracle of their sharing. Nothing was ever portioned by status or strength. The one who struck the killing blow did not eat first or take the largest share. Often he ate last, waiting until the children and elders had been given what they needed. A hunter might carry the best cuts to a woman who had recently given birth, or to an elder whose hands shook too much to hold a spear steady anymore. The band did not keep score. There was no tally of who had given more or taken less. The understanding ran deeper. Today I am strong and you are weary. Tomorrow the wind may change. What goes around the circle today will come around again when it is needed. Feel that rhythm now, slow, steady, endless. Midday arrives and the heat presses down like a warm blanket. The band finds shade, perhaps beneath a wide spreading fever-berry tree or in the cool mouth of a shallow overhang carved by an ancient river. They do not rush to eat. First they sit together, passing small handfuls of whatever has been gathered. Sour plums, crunchy water-rich stems, roasted larvae cracked from old logs. Fingers brush fingers as food moves from hand to hand. Lips part in small smiles of thanks that need no words. A mother breaks open a seed pod and offers half to the woman beside her before tasting her own share. An uncle chews a strip of dried meat soft and places it in the mouth of a toddler too young to tear it himself. Every act of giving is small, quiet, ordinary, and yet it is the very pulse that kept the band beating for generation after generation. As the afternoon softens toward evening, new tasks appear without announcement. Someone notices the pile of stones near the sleeping place is low. 2 or 3 drift off together to a nearby outcrop where good flint can be found. They strike and flake in companionable silence, the sharp crack of stone on stone blending with the hum of insects. Others repair sleeping mats, twisting fresh grass strands, weaving them tight so no thorn or pebble can work its way through in the night. A woman scrapes a fresh hide clean with a sharp flake, preparing it to become a carrying sling or a warm layer when colder nights arrive. Children help where they can, gathering armloads of dry twigs, carrying small stones, watching with wide eyes and imitating every motion. No task was ever owned by only one kind of person. A strong young man might sit for hours patiently untangling knots in a length of sinew, while an older woman showed him the best way to twist it into cord. A girl barely walking yet would be handed a small mortar stone and invited to pound seeds beside her grandmother. The knowledge flowed freely in every direction, elder to young, young to elder, man to woman, woman to man. There was no corner of skill that belonged to only half the band. Everyone learned a little of everything so that if one person was lost to fever or injury, the circle did not collapse. The sharing of knowledge was as complete as the sharing of food. And when night returned, as it always did, the band drew even closer. The fire was built small and careful, fed just enough to keep warmth without wasting wood. They sat in their loose circle, shoulders touching shoulders, knees brushing knees. Stories moved through the air, not long dramatic tales shouted for effect, but soft murmurs passed from one voice to the next. A sound that meant the place where the river bends twice and the big fig tree stands alone. A low hum that carried the memory of a season when rain came so heavily the plains turned into lakes and everyone ate fish until their bellies shone. A gentle clicking that spoke of the night. A lion passed close but did not strike because so many voices rose together in steady rhythm. These were not histories written for strangers. They were memories kept alive for the children listening now, for the children yet to be born tomorrow. Every sound, every gesture, every repeated phrase was a thread tying the living to the ones who had walked before them and to the ones who would walk after. In this way, the band carried time itself inside its circle, thousands of years of quiet knowing held in voices no louder than a breeze. Let yourself rest deeper into that circle now. Feel the warmth of bodies closed together, hear the soft crackle of the fire blending with soft breathing all around. Grief came here too, of course, a child who did not wake one morning, a hunter who followed game too far and never returned, an elder whose eyes grew cloudy and whose steps finally stopped, but sorrow was never carried alone. When loss arrived, the band simply held the space wider. They sat closer. They touched more often, hands resting on backs, foreheads leaning together. They made sounds that rose and fell like waves until the sharpest edge of pain had softened. They carried the memory of the lost one in every story told afterward, so no one ever vanished completely. Even in grief, the sharing continued. This is how the days turned into seasons, seasons into lifetimes, lifetimes into centuries. The band did not need kings or laws or storehouses filled with surplus. It needed only what it already had, enough people to hold every task, enough trust to share every bite, enough memory to carry every lesson forward. And because of that simple sufficiency, the way of life flowed onward, almost unchanged, for more years than most modern minds can easily hold. The fire is lower now, only embers glowing like distant stars fall into earth. The band settles onto their mats, bodies curling naturally toward one another for warmth. A baby sighs in sleep. An elder murmurs something soft and wordless. Somewhere far off a night bird calls once, twice, then falls silent. The sharing does not stop when eyes close. It simply becomes quieter, deeper, carried in dreams that mingle together under the same wide sky. The embers have cooled to the faintest red glow. The night air carries only the smallest sounds now, the distant rustle of a small creature moving through dry grass, the soft sigh of wind passing between branches, the even breathing of 28 sleeping forms curled close together. Dawn is still hours away, but already the band exists in that gentle borderland between sleep and waking where dreams and memories flow into one another without boundary. One of the women stirs first, not because of hunger or discomfort, but because her body has learned the rhythm of the sky. She sits up slowly, wraps a soft hide around her shoulders, and simply waits. No one else moves yet. She does not wake them. She watches the eastern horizon where the first pale thread of light will soon appear, and in that quiet watching she carries the whole band forward into another day. Let yourself remain here with her for a long, unhurried moment. Feel how still everything is. How safe we have walked through the forming of the band, through the gentle numbers that held them, through the daily sharing of tasks and food and knowledge that made survival feel like the most natural thing in the world. Now let us drift into the quieter, more hidden trials, the moments when the land did not give easily, when bodies grew weak or broken, when fear brushed close enough to touch, and see how the same unbroken sharing answered every test without ever needing to become something louder or harder. Hunger came in waves, never suddenly, but slowly, like a tide creeping higher each day. There were long, dry seasons when the grasses turned brittle and golden, when the herds moved far beyond the daily walking range, when the streams shrank to thin trickles between cracked mud. The band did not panic. Panic would have scattered them. Instead, they drew even closer. They ate what remained in careful order. First, the tubers dug from deep beneath the surface where moisture still lingered, then the hard seeds cracked between stones, then the inner bark peeled in thin strips from certain trees that held faint sweetness even in drought. When those ran low, they turned to things most creatures ignored, certain insects rich in fat, the soft pith inside young palm fronds, the tiny fish trapped in shrinking pools. Every find, no matter how small, was brought back to the center and divided with the same calm touch used on better days. A single grasshopper, carefully caught and roasted, would be broken into 28 tiny portions. Fingers pinched off fragments no larger than a fingernail and passed them one to the next until every mouth had tasted something. No one ever refused their share to give to another. That would have broken the circle's balance. Instead, the one who felt least hungry simply chewed more slowly, letting the flavor linger longer so the body believed it had received more. In this way, even the leanest days were born together. No child ever went entirely without while an adult ate. No elder was forgotten while younger bodies still moved strongly. The hunger was real, sometimes sharp enough to make hands tremble, but it was shared hunger, and shared hunger never felt quite as cruel as hunger alone. Injury arrived more suddenly, though never without warning signs the band had learned to read over generations. A man steps wrong on loose rock and the ankle turns with a soft pop. Pain flares bright and immediate. He does not cry out loudly. He knows the sound would startle the children, but those nearest feel the change in his breathing, see the way his weight shifts. Without words, the group stops. 2 women move to his sides, each taking an arm. Another finds a straight branch and strips it of twigs to make a simple support. They do not rush him back to camp. They wait until the first sharp edge of pain eases, then begin the slow walk home, bearing almost his full weight between them. The rest of the band adjusts without discussion. Someone carries his spear, someone else his small pouch of personal stones and cord. Children walk closer to make sure no one steps on thorns in the distraction. At camp, the injured man is settled on the softest bedding. Women who know plants best disappear into the surrounding brush and return with leaves that cool burning skin, roots that can be chewed into a bitter paste to dull deep pain, bark scraped thin and soaked to make a compress that draws swelling down. Others keep the fire steady, warm water in a hollowed gourd, prepare the easiest foods to swallow. For days, sometimes weeks, the man does not hunt or carry heavy loads, but he is never useless. He sits where the light is good and shows children how to flake the finest cutting edges from small cores of stone. He tells soft stories of paths he once walked when his ankle still bent without complaint. His voice becomes part of the healing. The band does not count the days he cannot contribute in the old way. They simply widen their circle around him until he can step back into it. Illness moved more slowly and often more cruelly. Fevers that rose like fire inside the body. Coughs that rattled deep in the chest and left flecks of blood on lips. Stomachs that turned against every bite. When these arrived, the band responded with the same quiet certainty they brought to hunger or injury. The sick one was never moved away to protect the others. Separation would have been a kind of death before death. Instead, the circle tightened. Someone always stayed close, usually a woman whose hands were known to be steady and cool, sponging skin with damp leaves, holding water to cracked lips drop by drop, humming the same low melody night after night until breathing eased or stopped. Others brought anything the body might accept: thin broth made from boiled bones, mashed fruit strained through clean grass, sips of water flavored with certain flowers that soothed the throat. If the illness spread, more hands joined the tending. No one fled. No one blamed the sick for bringing danger. They understood that breath shared in close quarters could carry invisible harm, yet they also understood that loneliness carried a harm far worse. So they stayed, they touched, they breathed the same air. And when someone slipped away in the night, quietly, without struggle, the band did not scatter in terror. They gathered closer still. They cleaned the body with gentle hands, wrapped it in the softest hides, carried it to a place the person had once loved, a shady grove, a bend in the river, a rise where the first light touched the land each morning. They placed stones around the resting place, not as a barrier, but as a gentle mark of memory. Then they returned to camp and continued. The name was not forgotten. The voice was repeated in stories. The empty space beside the fire was filled with extra closeness from the others until time softened the sharpest edges. Fear came too, not the sudden fear of a lion's roar that was met with raised voices and thrown stones and standing together until the danger passed, but the slower, deeper fear that sometimes settled over the whole band when the world felt too empty, too silent, too indifferent. A season when no rain fell for moon after moon. A time when every path they tried led only to more dry earth. In those moments the sharing turned inward as much as outward. They sat longer around the fire. They touched more often, hands resting on shoulders, foreheads pressed together, children held close until small hearts stopped racing. They sang the oldest songs, the ones that carried no words, only steady rhythm and repeating sound, until the fear loosened its grip just enough to let tomorrow feel possible again. Through every trial the same truth held: nothing was faced alone. No hunger, no wound, no fever, no night of fear ever belonged to one person. The band absorbed each blow the way a wide, shallow lake absorbs a stone, ripples spread outward, touching every shore, but the water itself remains. This was not courage in the dramatic sense we sometimes imagine today. It was something quieter, more enduring, the refusal to let any single life become separate from the rest. The sky is beginning to lighten now. A soft gray edge appears along the horizon. The first bird calls once, softly, testing whether the world is ready to wake. The woman who rose first touches the shoulder of the woman sleeping beside her. A gentle squeeze, nothing more, eyes open slowly, breathing changes. One by one the band returns to the day, not because anyone demands it, but because the shared rhythm calls them back. They will walk again soon, search again, share again. The trials have not ended, they never truly end, but neither has the circle that answers them. The first thin line of gold has now appeared along the eastern edge of the world, the light so pale it seems almost silver, touching the highest blades of grass first, then slowly sliding downward like honey poured from an invisible hand. The band rises in the same gentle sequence they always have. The ones nearest the fire feel the warmth change first, then the children stir against the bodies curled around them, then the elders open their eyes last of all, letting the new day greet them without haste. No one speaks yet. Words are not needed when the morning itself is speaking in soft colors and slow-moving shadows. Let yourself stay right here in this quiet awakening. Feel how the cool night air still clings to your skin while the first rays carry the promise of warmth. Hear the small sounds that mark the beginning of another day. A baby's sleepy murmur, the soft crack of a twig as someone shifts position, the distant trill of a bird testing its voice against the dawn. We have walked together through the forming of the first band, through the numbers and the sharing, through the daily tasks that flowed without command, through the hunger and wounds and fevers that tested them and were met with the same steady closeness. Now let us drift even further into the patient, invisible ways this way of life passed itself forward, generation after generation, without ever needing walls or writings or rulers to hold it in place. Children were born into the circle the way rain is born into a river, naturally, inevitably, welcomed without ceremony yet with the deepest attention. When a woman's belly grew round and heavy, the entire band noticed long before she said anything. They began to walk more slowly on the long days. They chose campsites closer to reliable water and softer ground. Other women who had nursed before offered their own milk if the new mother's supply came slowly. They did this without pride or pity, simply as one breath follows another. The birth itself happened in the midst of the group, not hidden away, not surrounded by strangers, but right there in the familiar circle where every face was already known and trusted. The mother leaned against the strongest backs, held by hands that had carried her when she herself was small. No one shouted instructions. No one panicked. The women who had done this before moved closest, kneeling, murmuring low sounds of encouragement, pressing warm compresses of soaked leaves against skin, catching the new life when it arrived slippery and crying into the morning air. The rest of the band formed a quiet outer ring, men standing with spears lowered but ready in case any danger approached, children peeking wide-eyed from between adult legs, elders nodding slowly as though remembering every birth that had come before this one. The first cry was not met with loud cheers. It was met with soft touches, fingers brushing the tiny head, lips brushing the tiny brow, voices humming the same low melody that had been hummed at every birth since memory began. The afterbirth was buried carefully beneath a tree or near running water, so the new life would always know where it had entered the world. Then the child was passed slowly from hand to hand around the entire circle, not as a display, but as introduction. This small one now belongs to all of us, and all of us belong to this small one. From the very first hours, the baby never belonged only to the mother who carried it. Any woman still producing milk would offer her breast when the child fussed. Any adult with free arms would carry the infant when the mother needed to gather or rest. Older children learned to watch for the tiny signs of hunger or discomfort and would run to fetch someone who could help. In this way, the child grew up held by dozens of hands, sung to by dozens of voices, fed by dozens of sources. No single person could fail the child without the whole band feeling the lack, and so no single person was ever allowed to fail alone. As the years turned, these children did not need to be gathered for lessons. Learning happened the way breathing happens, constantly, unconsciously, completely. A girl of 4 or 5 would squat beside her grandmother and watch how the older fingers twisted plant fibers into strong cord. After a dozen mornings, she would reach for her own small handful of fibers and begin to copy the motion. No one praised her loudly. No one corrected her harshly. If the cord came uneven, she simply unwound it and tried again the next day. A boy of 7 would trail the hunters, not close enough to be in danger, but near enough to see how a spear was balanced, how a trail was read, how patience was kept when game did not appear. One day he would pick up a smaller spear and try the same motions. The men would watch without comment, then quietly show him how to adjust his grip or his stance. Knowledge flowed in every direction at once. A young woman who had discovered a new patch of sweet roots would lead the others there the following season and show them the exact bend in the stream where the plants grew thickest. An elder man whose eyes had grown dim would sit with the flint knappers and describe, with gestures and soft sounds, the shapes that had once saved his hands from slipping on wet stone years before. A child who found a particularly good throwing stone would run to show it to everyone, and the adults would nod and smile and place it carefully in the communal pile so it could serve the whole band when needed. There was no hierarchy of teachers and students. An 8-year-old girl who had watched birds for many seasons might one day point to the sky and make a sound that meant rain coming soon, and the adults would listen because they knew her watching had been steady and true. An elder whose body had grown slow might still remember the paths to distant waterholes no one else had seen in 30 years. When he spoke, even the strongest hunters paused and turned their heads to hear. Every voice mattered. Every pair of eyes added something to the shared memory. And when children reached the age when their bodies changed, when girls began to bleed and boys grew taller and deeper voiced, the band met those changes with the same quiet acceptance. No great ceremonies were needed because the changes themselves were ceremony enough. The young woman who bled for the first time was given extra soft hides to sit on, extra food to rebuild her strength, extra closeness from the other women who had walked that path before her. The young man whose voice began to break was given his first full-sized spear, not as a reward, but as recognition that his arms were now strong enough to help carry more for the circle. Both were still children in many ways, still carried on shoulders when tired, still fed first when food was scarce, but they were also beginning to carry others in turn. This seamless passing of life from one set of hands to the next allowed the band to endure far beyond any single lifetime. When an elder finally lay down for the last time, breathing slowing, eyes growing still, the group did not collapse into despair. They had lost people before, they would lose people again. They simply widened the circle once more. The stories the elder had told were repeated that very night, and the next, softly, carefully, so the words would not fade. The places he had shown them were walked again, so the paths stayed clear in memory. The small habits he had, perhaps the way he always placed 3 particular stones around the fire before sleeping, were quietly continued by others until they became part of the band itself. In this way, the first human band did not merely survive generation after generation, it remembered itself. It carried its own small history forward, not in marks on cave walls or notches on bone, though those things would come much later, but in living bodies and living voices. Every child who learned to flake a stone was taught by someone who had been taught by someone who had been taught by the ones who first understood that striking one stone against another could produce an edge sharp enough to cut hide or meat. Every song hummed at dusk carried notes that had been hummed 10,000 years earlier. Every gentle touch given to a crying baby echoed touches given when the band itself was only a few moons old. The light is fuller now. The sun has cleared the horizon. Warmth spreads across the camp like a slow tide. The band begins to move, rolling sleeping mats, tying bundles, sipping water from ostrich egg shells, sharing the last handfuls of yesterday's gathered seeds. A young mother lifts her toddler onto her hip while an older sister carries the water gourd. A man helps an elder tie his small bundle more securely. Children run ahead a little, then circle back to make sure the slowest walkers are not left too far behind. The sharing continues without pause, without announcement, without end. The sun now stands a hand's width above the horizon, its light no longer tentative but steady and warm, painting every blade of grass with a soft golden edge and turning the distant acacia trees into quiet pillars of shadow and shine. The band has already begun its slow morning walk, children darting a few paces ahead to chase the flight of a colorful bird, then circling back laughing to rejoin the adults who move at the calm pace the elders can still keep. No one scolds the children for running. Their energy is welcomed. It reminds everyone that life continues to flow forward even on ordinary mornings. Let your steps fall into the same gentle rhythm now. Feel the warm earth give softly beneath bare feet. Hear the quiet sounds that travel with the group, small stones clicking together in a carrying pouch, the light slap of hide against skin as bundles shift, the low murmur of voices exchanging single words or soft hums that mean good path today, or watch the child near the thorn bush. We have followed the circle from its quiet beginning through the sharing of food and care, through the patient teaching that passed itself from hand to hand across generations. Now let us drift outward a little further, into the moments when this small band of 25 to 40 souls met other small bands like itself, when eyes that had never seen one another before looked across open ground, when strangers were not driven away but slowly, carefully welcomed into the wider weave. These meetings did not happen every season. The land was wide and the bands small. Paths sometimes did not cross for many moons or even many years. Yet when they did happen, the encounter followed its own ancient, unhurried pattern, one that had been repeated so many times it felt as natural as the turning of wet season into dry. Imagine the band moving along the edge of a wide, shallow valley where a river has carved gentle curves through soft earth. The air carries the faint scent of water and wet mud, even though the river itself is thin this late in the dry time. Ahead, near a cluster of low trees heavy with dark fruit, another group is already resting, perhaps 30 people, their shapes small against the landscape but clearly human. Children playing in the shade, adults seated in loose circles, smoke rising thin and blue from a small midday fire. The first band does not stop abruptly. They do not crouch or hide. They simply slow their pace until the two groups can see one another clearly across 200 or 300 paces of open ground. No shouts are exchanged at first. No spears are raised in threat. Instead, both bands do the same quiet thing. They pause. Adults stand still. Children are gently drawn closer to familiar legs. Everyone watches. Everyone waits. The silence lasts long enough for hearts to settle, for eyes to grow accustomed to new faces, for the wind to carry scent in both directions so that each group can smell the smoke and sweat and plant oils of the other. After this long, patient pause, sometimes the length of time it takes the sun to move the width of two outstretched hands, one person from each band steps forward alone. Not the strongest or the loudest, but usually someone older, someone whose face carries the calm of many seasons survived. A woman perhaps, or a man whose hair has begun to silver at the temples. They walk slowly toward the midpoint between the two groups, hands open and empty at their sides, steps measured so no sudden movement startles anyone. When they are close enough to see one another's eyes clearly but still far enough to turn back without haste, they stop again. Here the first small offering is made, not words yet but gesture. One person crouches, picks up a smooth stone from the ground, places it carefully on a flat patch of earth between them, then steps back. The other does the same. Two stones now lie side by side. A third stone is added by the first, making 3. The second adds a fourth. Back and forth they place stones until the small pile is even, 6, 8, 10, enough to show balance, enough to say without sound, we come in peace, we offer what we have, we recognize you are here as we are here. Only after the stones are placed do the soft sounds begin. Low hums, gentle clicks, short repeating phrases that carry no command, only recognition. The two emissaries stand for a while longer, letting the sounds settle into the air between them like dust after a breeze has passed. Then they turn, each walking back to their own group without hurry. Behind them, the rest of both bands have already begun to move closer, not rushing, not crowding, but drifting together the way two streams meet and become one larger stream without losing their own character. By late afternoon, the two groups are sharing shade. Not merged completely, not yet, but close enough that voices carry easily from one fire to the other. Children from both bands eye one another across the space, curious but cautious. A girl from the first band offers a handful of ripe berries to a boy from the second. He accepts them, tastes one, then runs back to show his mother. A little while later, he returns with a small piece of honeycomb wrapped in a leaf and places it in her hand. No one supervises these exchanges. No one declares them important, yet every small gift is noticed, remembered, repeated. As the sun lowers and the air cools, the sharing grows wider. Food is brought to a common place between the fires, roots roasted earlier, strips of dried meat, handfuls of nuts cracked open with stones. Everyone eats from the common pile. No one guards their own portion. A woman from one band nurses a child from the other when its own mother steps away to gather more wood. A man from the second band shows a young hunter from the first how he ties a particular knot that holds better when pulling heavy loads. The knot is demonstrated once, watched carefully, then tried immediately. When it holds, both men make the same soft sound of satisfaction. Night falls and the two fires are fed until they become one larger fire, still modest, still carefully tended, but bright enough to light all the faces now sitting in a single wide circle. Stories begin to move. Not long tales shouted for drama, but short, repeating phrases accompanied by gestures. The sound of a certain bird that means water nearby, the shape of a hill where good flint can be found, the path a herd took last wet season when the grass grew tall enough to hide even the tallest person. Each phrase is offered by one voice, then repeated by several others until it settles into shared memory. In this way, the two bands begin to carry pieces of one another's knowing. These meetings could last a few days or many weeks. Sometimes the groups traveled together for a full season, walking the same paths, sleeping under the same sky, sharing every meal and every task. Children played together without distinction. Young people from one band began to look longer at young people from the other. When affection grew between them, no one forbade it. A young woman might choose to walk with the other band for a time. A young man might stay behind with his new partner's people. These movements were gentle, never forced, always reversible. The child born of such a union carried kinship in both directions, tying the two bands together even after they parted ways. And part they eventually did, not in anger or hurry, but when the land itself suggested it was time. A river might grow too wide to cross easily together. Game trails might fork in different directions. The shared season would end with the same quiet ritual that began it. Stones placed in balance one last time, soft sounds of farewell repeated until they faded into the wind, hands touching shoulders or foreheads in the oldest gesture of connection. Then each band turned its own way, carrying now a slightly wider memory, a few more names, a handful of new knots and songs and places. These meetings happened countless times across thousands of years, not always leading to long unions, but always leaving a small thread of trust stretched across the landscape. One band taught another where to find water during the hardest dry months. Another showed how to shape a spear point that broke less often against bone. A third shared the melody that calmed a fever when leaves and roots alone were not enough. Over generations, these small gifts accumulated, not as property to be owned, but as knowing to be carried forward. The bands remained separate in their daily walking, yet they were never truly alone. The circle had grown wider without ever losing its center. The sky has deepened to the soft purple of evening now. The first stars appear one by one like quiet breaths. The combined group sits close around the single fire, bodies touching, voices low. A child from one band sleeps against the shoulder of a woman from the other. An elder traces shapes in the ash with a stick, showing a path no one in the second band has walked before. The sharing continues, unhurried, unmeasured, unending. The fire has settled into a low, steady bed of coals now, its light no longer leaping but glowing with a deep, even warmth that reaches every face in the wide circle without favoring anyone over another. The two bands have become something closer to one for this season, bodies intermixed, sleeping mats laid so close that a hand stretched out in the night would find familiar skin, whether it belonged to someone born under the same stars or someone met only 3 moons ago. The children no longer separate into two groups when they play. They chase one another in a single noisy swirl, their laughter rising and falling like waves on a quiet lake. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the firelight, a hyena calls once, low and far, but no one startles. The circle is wide tonight. The circle is enough. Let your own breathing slow until it matches the slow rise and fall of the coals. Feel how the warmth touches your face first, then your chest, then seems to sink gently into every part of you. Listen to the soft, overlapping sounds of the night. Someone humming a tune that might have come from either band, the occasional soft word passed between two people lying side by side, the rustle of a child shifting closer to an adult who was a stranger only weeks before. We have seen how small bands reached toward one another across open ground, how trust was offered in stones and shared meals and repeating songs, how kinship began to stretch like fine threads between groups that once walked separate paths. Now let us drift further still, into the long, patient seasons when the very breath of the earth itself changed, when wet years gave way to dry decades and dry decades sometimes returned to wet centuries, when the land tested the sharing in ways no single lifetime could fully remember, and the bands answered not by breaking apart but by holding tighter together. The climate did not shift in a single violent storm. It changed the way a river changes course, slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, then with a steadiness that could not be ignored. For many generations, the rains came reliably each wet season, filling the wide pans of the landscape until they became temporary lakes where fish could be speared and waterfowl caught in shallow nets of twisted grass. The grasses grew tall enough to hide a standing person. The herds swelled until the plains seemed to move as one living thing. During those generous times, the bands grew a little larger, not suddenly, but gradually, sometimes holding 45 or even 50 souls for a few seasons when food stayed plentiful and children survived their first fragile years in greater numbers. The sharing stretched easily to cover the extra mouths. The circle simply widened a few more hand spans around the fire. Then the pattern began to tilt. The wet seasons arrived later each year. The rains, when they came, fell in shorter, fiercer bursts that ran off hard-baked ground instead of soaking deep. Rivers that once flowed year-round shrank to chains of pools separated by dry sand. Grasses grew thinner, shorter, patchier. Herds thinned and moved farther in search of better pasture. The bands felt the change long before they could name it, in the way a mother's milk sometimes came slower after birth, in the way children's legs grew thinner between one wet season and the next, in the way the oldest members began to speak more often of paths they had walked as children that no longer held water when followed today. They did not meet this slow drying with despair or scattering. Instead, they remembered what they had always known. Closeness was safety, sharing was survival. When a waterhole that had never failed before held only mud at the bottom, the combined bands did not split to search in different directions. They moved together slowly, carefully toward the places the elders still carried in memory, a certain narrow valley where a spring emerged even in the hardest years, a stretch of river that stayed deeper because underground water fed it from beneath the sand. The journey took many days, sometimes many weeks. They rationed what they carried in ostrich egg shells and folded leaves. They dug shallow wells with their hands and sticks where the sand felt slightly damp. Every drop found was shared drop by drop, passed mouth to mouth if necessary so that no throat stayed completely dry while another still held moisture. Along these long walks, the sharing deepened in small, almost invisible ways. A woman whose feet had begun to crack from the dry heat would find someone walking beside her who knew how to mix a paste of certain crushed leaves and animal fat. She would apply it at night and wake to find the cracks already beginning to close. A hunter whose spear arm had grown stiff from an old injury would discover that a man from the other band carried a particular way of throwing lighter darts that demanded less strength. The two would practice together at dusk, until the technique felt natural in both sets of hands. Children learned words from both groups, sounds that meant the same thing but carried slightly different music, and soon the youngest were mixing the two languages without thinking, creating something new that belonged to no single band but to all the children walking together. When the rains finally returned, as they always did, even if the waiting lasted years, the bands greeted them not with loud rejoicing but with quiet, steady work. They planted nothing, no one had yet learned to stay in one place long enough to tend growing things, but they watched where the new green appeared first and thickest. They followed the fresh growth the way they had once followed herds, and because they had walked together through the dry time, they arrived at the best places together. The sharing that had kept them alive through thirst now fed them through abundance. A single stand of ripening seed heads was harvested by many hands working side by side. The seeds were pounded and mixed and roasted over fires tended by many watchers. No one hoarded. No one feared shortage tomorrow, because tomorrow's food was already being gathered by the same circle that had carried today's hunger. These great swings of wet and dry repeated across tens of thousands of years, not in perfect cycles, but in long, irregular waves that could last a human lifetime or several lifetimes strung together. Sometimes the dry periods stretched so long that entire regions emptied of people for generations. The bands that survived did so by moving great distances, always together, always carrying the same quiet rules forward. Sometimes the wet periods lingered so abundantly that the bands grew larger still, occasionally splitting peacefully when a valley or a river system could comfortably hold more than 50 or 60 without straining the delicate balance of knowing everyone's face and name and needs. Yet even when groups divided, the parting was gentle. Stones were placed in careful balance one last time. Soft sounds of farewell were repeated until the voices faded into distance. Children born of mixed unions carried kinship in both directions, so that years later, when paths crossed again, the two groups recognized one another not as strangers but as kin who had once shared fire and food and sky. The threads never truly snapped, they stretched, they looped, they reconnected. In this way, the sharing that began in the first small band of 25 to 40 never remained locked inside one circle. It flowed outward across landscapes, across centuries, across every change the earth itself could bring. The coals have sunk lower now, their glow softer, more distant. The night air carries a faint coolness that makes bodies shift closer without waking. Somewhere in the darkness, a nightjar calls its repetitive, soothing note, chir, 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 like a heartbeat made of sound. The people sleep in a single wide pattern now, arms and legs overlapping in the oldest human geometry, the shape that says no one is outside, no one is alone, no one is forgotten. Rest inside this long memory of change and return. Feel how the same gentle hands that once shared the first roasted roots now share the memory of roots found after years of searching. How the same soft voices that once hummed to calm a single fever now hum to calm the fear that the rains might never come again. The earth breathes in long cycles. The people breathe with it, together, always together. Tomorrow we will look deeper still, into the quiet moments when something new began to stir inside the minds of these people. Not tools or weapons or new ways of finding food, but something less visible, something that lived in the spaces between words and touches. The first faint outlines of stories that reached beyond memory of yesterday. The first sense that the stars above were not only lights but watchers, the first feeling that the dead were not truly gone but still present in the circle somehow. We will see how the sharing began to hold not only bodies and knowledge, but also dreams, fears, questions, and the slow beginning of wonder itself. The coals have become only the faintest memory of red now, scattered pinpoints of warmth among soft gray ash. The night so deep that the Milky Way stretches overhead like a slow river of light poured across black stone. The wide circle of sleepers breathes as one slow tide, inhale, long pause, exhale. The sound so even it could almost be the land itself rising and falling under the stars. A child turns in sleep, nestling closer to the curve of an unrelated back. A hand reaches out without waking and rests lightly there. No one stirs, the touch is enough. Let yourself sink completely into this stillness. Feel how the cool night air brushes only the outermost edges of skin, while the shared warmth beneath holds everything steady. Listen to the almost silent rhythm that has carried this way of life forward for so many turns of the seasons. Breath after breath, heartbeat after heartbeat, generation layered quietly upon generation. We have followed the first bands through drought and plenty, through meetings with strangers who became kin, through the patient stretching of trust across wide landscapes. Now let us drift inward once more, not to tasks or trials or travels, but to the quiet place where something new and fragile began to form inside those ancient minds. The first faint outlines of wonder that reached beyond the needs of today, the first soft questions about what could not be seen or touched or eaten, the first threads of meaning that the sharing began to hold as carefully as it held food and water and children. No one can say exactly when it started. There was no morning when someone woke and declared, "Today we will wonder." It arrived the way mist arrives on grass, slowly, silently, everywhere at once. Perhaps it began with the stars. On clear nights like this one, the sky was so thick with light that it seemed almost solid. The people lying on their backs would sometimes stop breathing for a moment simply to watch. They did not yet have names for constellations or stories of gods riding chariots across the dark. They had only recognition. Those lights returned every night in the same slow turning. They moved together, they never fell. And in their steady returning, the band began to feel something like comfort that was different from the comfort of a full belly or a warm shoulder beside them at night. Someone, perhaps an elder whose eyes had grown very clear with age, would point upward with a slow, open hand. A soft sound would follow, not loud, not urgent, just present. A low hum that rose slightly at the end like a question without words. Others would turn their heads. The hum would be repeated, passed quietly around the circle until it became a shared sound, something everyone could make and everyone could hear. They did not explain the stars. They did not decide what the stars meant. They simply included them in the circle the way they included a new child or a new knot or a new path to water. The stars became part of what was shared. The same gentle inclusion happened with other things that could not be held. Thunder that rolled across the plains long after lightning had vanished. Rainbows that curved suddenly through falling water and then dissolved into nothing. The way certain flowers opened only after the first real rain and closed again before the sun grew too high. The bones of large animals found bleaching white under the sun years after the meat was gone. These were not feared as omens or collected as treasures. They were noticed. They were pointed to. Soft sounds were made in their presence. Children were lifted so they could see clearly. And in the noticing, in the shared pointing and shared sounding, the band began to carry something more than memory of practical things. They began to carry questions. The questions were never asked sharply or demanded answers. They lived in pauses, long moments when no one moved or spoke, when eyes rested on a distant horizon or on the small, perfect spiral of a shell picked up beside a stream. A woman might hold such a shell for many minutes, turning it slowly in her fingers, tracing the curve with a fingertip, then pass it to the person beside her without comment. That person would do the same. Around the circle it would travel until it returned to the first hands or was placed carefully with other small things that had caught attention. A feather whose colors shifted in the light, a stone with veins of quartz running through it like frozen lightning, the delicate hollow bone of a bird that made a soft whistle when blown through. These objects were not owned. They were held by the group. They were wondered at by the group. And in wondering together, the band gave itself permission to feel something beyond hunger, beyond safety, beyond tomorrow's walk. Dreams, too, became part of this quiet expansion. Sleep had always been shared, bodies close for warmth, for protection, for the simple knowledge that no one was alone in the dark. But now the dreams themselves began to be shared in the morning light. A man would wake, sit up slowly, rub his eyes, and make a series of small gestures. Hands shaping something round, then something long and pointed, then a motion like running followed by falling. Others would watch. Someone might hum a questioning sound. The man would repeat the gestures, add a few more. Soon several people were making similar shapes with their hands, trying the motions, seeing if the feeling matched. No one translated the dream into a story with beginning and end. They simply let it move among them the way food moved, passed from hand to hand, tasted by everyone, absorbed without anyone claiming it as their own. When someone did not wake at all, when breath stopped quietly in the night and the body grew cool, the band met that stillness with the same wondering openness. They did not rush to bury or burn or leave the one who had stopped breathing. They sat with the body for a full turning of the sun and sometimes longer. They touched the cooling skin gently, smoothed hair, arranged limbs comfortably as though the person were only sleeping deeply. Soft sounds were made, not loud wailing, but low repeating tones that rose and fell like breathing itself. Children were allowed to come close, to look, to touch if they wished. No one hid death. No one pretended it was not happening. They included it. And in including it, they began to feel the absence as something real yet not entirely separate. The one who had stopped breathing did not vanish from the circle completely. Their name, soft sound that had once belonged only to them, was spoken again the next night and the next, woven into the small repeating phrases that passed around the fire. Their favorite place to sit was left open for a time, so the shape of their body was still remembered in the negative space. Their way of tilting the head when listening was copied unconsciously by others until it became part of the group itself. In this way the dead remained quietly, invisibly inside the sharing. They were carried forward not as ghosts to be feared, but as presences to be included. The way a song learned long ago is still sung even when the one who first sang it no longer walks the earth. This slow birth of wonder did not change the daily rhythm. The band still walked for water, still gathered what the land offered, still divided every root and every drop with the same steady hands. But now the walking carried something extra. A child would point to a cloud shaped like an antelope and make a delighted sound. Adults would look, smile softly, repeat the sound. An elder would pause beside a tree struck by lightning years before, blackened, split, yet still sending green shoots from the base, and rest a hand against the trunk for a long moment while others waited without impatience. The tree was included, the lightning was included, the new green was included. Everything the eyes fell upon could become part of the shared circle if only it was noticed together. The sky has begun to soften at the edges now, the deepest black giving way to the first almost colorless gray of pre-dawn. A single bright star lingers low in the west like the last note of a long song. The band begins to stir, not all at once, but in the same slow wave that has greeted every morning since the beginning. Eyes open, breathing changes. Hands reach out to touch shoulders, arms, small heads of sleeping children. No one speaks yet, there is no need. The wonder that has been growing inside them does not require words to exist. It lives in the quiet spaces between touches, between glances, between one breath and the next. Rest here in the gentle returning of light. Feel how the same circle that once shared only food and warmth now shares something larger without ever naming it. How questions and dreams and memories of the gone are held as carefully as a newborn is held. How nothing is excluded, not even the things that cannot be carried in hands. The first human band has begun to carry meaning itself, softly, patiently, without hurry or doctrine. The gray of pre-dawn has given way to the first true color. A thin band of pale rose along the eastern rim of the world, spreading slowly upward until the sky itself seems to breathe light rather than hold it. The band wakes in the same soft, overlapping way they always have. A child's small sigh first, then the rustle of a mat as someone sits up to stretch arms overhead, then the gentle creak of older joints as elders rise last, letting the new day arrive without forcing it. Hands reach out instinctively, touching a shoulder here, smoothing hair there, small contacts that need no explanation because they have happened every morning for as long as memory reaches. Let yourself remain exactly. Feel the first warmth of sunlight touch the top of your head like the lightest possible hand. Hear how the waking sounds blend together into one continuous murmur. Soft yawns, quiet hums, the faint clink of water being poured from one shell to another so the youngest can drink before anyone else. We have followed the long river of their days from the first small circle through sharing, through trials answered together, through meetings that wove strangers into kin, through climate shifts met with patient closeness, through the quiet awakening of wonder that let stars and dreams and the dead become part of what was carried. Now let us drift toward the subtle threshold where this way of life, still so perfectly balanced in its wandering, began almost without anyone noticing, to linger a little longer in certain places, to return to the same groves and bends of river season after season, to leave the smallest, most unintentional traces that would one day be read as the deep beginning of something new. No one decided to stop wandering. Wandering remained the rhythm of their lives because the land itself remained wide and changing. Yet over many hundreds of generations, certain locations began to exert a gentle pull, not through force, but through memory and comfort and simple repetition. A particular valley where the river made 3 slow curves and never quite dried even in the longest dry time. A cluster of low sandstone hills riddled with shallow overhangs that caught the afternoon shade perfectly and blocked the worst of the wind at night. A wide grove of fever-berry trees whose fruit ripened reliably after the first good rains and whose fallen leaves made the softest bedding underfoot. These places were never claimed or owned. They were simply remembered more vividly than others. When the band approached one of these favored spots after months or years away, the recognition moved through the group like a slow current. An elder might pause at the crest of a rise, lift her chin slightly, make a low repeating sound that meant this place again. Others would hear it look and feel the same quiet settling in their chests. Children who had never seen this valley before would sense the change in the adults around them. The way shoulders relaxed a fraction, the way steps grew even slower, and they too would begin to look with new attention. By the time the group reached the first trees or the first curve of riverbank, the decision to stay had already been made without a single word of discussion. They did not build permanent structures. They had no need and no concept of permanence in the way later peoples would understand it. Yet staying longer changed the texture of daily life in small, accumulating ways. Sleeping mats were laid in the same sheltered curve of rock year after year, until the ground beneath them grew slightly smoother from repeated use. Fires were built in the same shallow depressions so often that the earth there blackened in a perfect circle and held heat longer than fresh ground ever could. Children played in the same shallow pools until the bottoms became packed hard and free of sharp stones. Women returned to the same patches of certain tuber plants season after season, digging carefully around the roots so new shoots could grow again the following year, not planting in rows or tending fields, but simply remembering exactly where to place each hand so the plant survived to feed them once more. These small acts of return left traces faint at first, almost invisible. A scattering of stone flakes where tools had been shaped beside the same stream for many seasons. A thin layer of ash and charcoal beneath the soil where fires had burned in the same spot through wet years and dry. Tiny fragments of ostrich eggshell that had held water, cracked and discarded near the sleeping places. Bones from animals taken nearby, cracked open for marrow and left in loose piles that slowly sank into the earth. None of these were deliberate markers. No one arranged stones in patterns or piled bones as monuments. They were simply the ordinary litter of lives lived repeatedly in the same gentle locations. Yet because the band returned often enough, the traces accumulated. A place used once left almost nothing. A place used dozens of times over decades began to show a faint signature in the ground itself, slightly darker soil, slightly more concentrated scatters of worked stone, slightly thicker layers of organic material from discarded plant fibers and hide scraps. Archaeologists who would come far in the future would one day call these places base camps or recurrent occupation sites, but to the people who made them they were simply good places, places that felt safe, places that remembered them as they remembered the places. While lingering longer in these favored spots, the sharing itself grew even more intricate in its quiet way. Tasks that once happened only during short stops now unfolded over weeks or months. A group of women might spend many days collecting the tough fibers from a particular kind of tree that grew thickly nearby, twisting them into long cords that would be carried when the band eventually moved on. Men might devote time to shaping larger stone cores into preforms, rough blanks that could later be finished into points or scrapers during leaner times. Children explored the same small territory day after day until they knew every rock, every bush, every place where a lizard liked to sun itself. The knowledge of the place deepened with each return, and that deepened knowledge was shared as completely as food had always been shared. Stories, too, began to attach more strongly to these locations. An overhang where a child had once been born during a sudden storm might be pointed to each time the band returned. The story of that night, how the rain hammered the rock while voices rose together in steady rhythm until the crying stopped and the new life breathed, would be retold with the same soft gestures and repeating sounds. A bend in the river where a hunter had once slipped and broken an arm, only to be carried back and tended until he could walk again, became a place where people paused to touch the water and make a small sound of thanks. These were not myths yet, not sacred tales separated from ordinary life. They were simply memories tied to geography, made stronger by repetition, carried forward the way a favorite path is carried forward, because walking it again feels right. The longer stays also allowed small experiments in closeness with the living world around them. Certain plants whose seeds passed unharmed through human digestion began to appear more thickly near the sleeping places, not because anyone sowed them deliberately, but because waste was left in the same general areas season after season. The band noticed. They did not yet understand cause and effect in the modern sense, but they noticed the pattern. Where we stay longer, certain useful plants sometimes grow more. So they began to linger even more deliberately near those plants, not tending them exactly, but favoring them, protecting them from being trampled by children at play, returning to them with a quiet sense of recognition. It was the very gentlest beginning of a relationship with growing things, not control, not ownership, but something closer to companionship. All of this happened without breaking the essential rhythm. The band still moved when the land asked them to move, when water grew too scarce, when herds drifted beyond reach, when the wind turned colder and carried dust that stung the eyes. They still carried everything they needed on their bodies or in simple bundles. They still divided every resource without counting or measuring. Yet the pattern of return had begun to weave a new layer into the fabric of their lives. Places that remembered them, places they remembered in return, places where the circle felt slightly more anchored even as it remained perfectly mobile. The rose in the sky has deepened now into true gold. The sun clears the horizon completely. Warmth floods the valley like slow water. The band begins its morning tasks, not rushing, never rushing, but with the calm certainty of people who know this place and know they will likely see it again when the seasons turn once more. Children run to the familiar pools. Women move toward the known patches of tubers. Men check the same overhangs for dry wood left from last time. Everything feels continuous. Everything feels shared. The gold of morning has spread fully across the valley now. Every leaf and blade of grass catching light until the whole world seems made of soft, living shimmer, the air already warming at the edges, carrying the faint, sweet scent of fever berry blossoms that have opened overnight. The band moves through their familiar tasks with the same unhurried grace they have carried since the very beginning. Children splashing in the shallow pools they know by heart, women kneeling beside the same tuber patches they have returned to for generations, men testing the balance of spears shaped weeks ago under the same overhang. Nothing is rushed, nothing is owned. Everything flows from hand to hand, from eye to eye, from breath to breath. Let yourself settle completely into this moment. Feel how the sunlight touches your skin the way it has touched every generation before you. Hear the quiet symphony that has never truly changed. Small stones clinking as tools are worked, soft laughter rising when a child discovers a new way to skip a flat pebble across water, the low hum of a woman repeating a melody older than any living voice. We have walked together through the entire long arc, from the first fragile circle of 25 to 40 souls who chose to share everything, through every hunger answered together, every wound tended without separation, every stranger welcomed into kinship, every dry season survived by refusing to scatter, every faint awakening of wonder that let stars and dreams and the gone become part of what was carried. Every gentle return to certain valleys and groves that slowly taught the land to remember them as they remembered the land. Now we reach the quiet place where all of those threads weave into the single unbroken truth that has held humanity from the beginning until this very breath you're taking. The sharing never stopped. It never needed to become something louder or more structured or more separated. Even as some bands began to linger longer still, building simple windbreaks of branches and hides weighted with stones, placing the bones of the departed with ochre rubbed gently on forehead and hands, drawing faint curving lines in soft clay beside the fire with a wet fingertip, the center remained the same. No one declared ownership of the shelter. No one guarded the drawings. No one ranked the living above the dead or the young above the old. The ochre was passed hand to hand until every willing finger carried a little red. The lines in the clay were looked at together, touched together, sometimes added to by small hands that had watched many times before trying. The shelter was slept in by whoever arrived first that night, and if someone needed more warmth, another body simply moved closer. Through every small shift, through the first repeated use of the same cave mouth for hundreds of seasons, through the first careful burial beneath the floor of a sleeping place so the departed remained literally underfoot, through the first pigments mixed with fat and drawn on skin or rock to mark a handprint or a curving horn or an open palm, the ancient pattern endured. What one found, all could use. What one knew, all could learn. What one felt, all could hold for a moment. The handprint pressed into wet clay beside the fire was not a signature of one person claiming a place. It was a quiet way of saying, we were here together. The red ochre smeared across a forehead before a long walk was not decoration for status. It was a shared color that said, we carry the same earth on our skin. And so the circle expanded, not by growing larger in number at any one fire, though some places held 60 or 70 for short seasons of plenty, but by stretching across time itself. Each generation added only the gentlest layer to what had come before. A child who had watched her mother twist fibers into cord would one day show her own daughter the same twist, perhaps adding a small variation that made the cord stronger against tearing. A man who had learned to read animal trails from his uncle would one day stand beside his grandson and point to the same signs, letting the boy place his own small finger on the print first. An elder whose eyes could no longer see the distant herds would sit with the youngest and guide their hands to shape a spear point by feel alone, until touch became sight. In this way the knowledge did not merely survive, it deepened, softened, became more complete with every passing life. The dead were never truly gone from this deepening. Their bodies rested beneath the places the living still walked, their handprints lingered on sheltered walls, their favorite songs were hummed by throats that had never heard the original voice. When a child asked why the old woman no longer rose with the sun, the answer was never, she is finished. The answer was a soft gesture toward the sleeping place, toward the fire, toward the sky. She is still here, still part of the circle, still sharing breath with us because we still breathe her name, we still make her sounds, we still walk where she walked. Death did not break the sharing, it simply changed its form, from warm skin to remembered touch, from living voice to repeated melody, from present hands to stories carried forward. Across tens of thousands of years, this single truth held steady while everything else around it slowly changed. The climate swung again and again between wet and dry. Herds moved into new territories and sometimes never returned. Rivers carved deeper valleys or dried into salt pans. New plants appeared in old places. Old plants vanished from familiar groves. Yet wherever the people walked, whether in small bands of 30 or larger gatherings of 100, they carried the same quiet agreement. No one eats until everyone has tasted. No one walks ahead until the slowest can follow. No one keeps what another needs. That agreement was never written. It was never enforced by threat or law. It was simply lived day after day, season after season, life after life, until it became the deepest shape of what it meant to be human. And here in this long unbroken line lies the single most important truth of our entire history. Everything we are, every city ever built, every song ever sung, every hand ever held in comfort or love, flows directly from those first quiet choices to stay close, to share everything, to refuse to let any single life become separate from the rest. Empires rose and fell on the strength or weakness of that original sharing. Civilizations remembered or forgot it at their peril. Yet the pattern itself never disappeared. It lives in every act of kindness that needs no reward, in every moment someone waits for the slower walker, in every time a stranger is met with an open hand instead of a closed fist. It lives in you. It lives in me. It lives in every person breathing under this same wide sky. The sun has climbed higher now. The valley glows with full midday light. The band rests in the shade they have always known, bodies close, voices low, children curled against familiar laps. A woman passes a handful of roasted seeds to the person beside her. A man adjusts the hide covering an elder's shoulders without being asked. A child places a small smooth stone beside another already arranged near the fire, 2 stones, then 3, then 4, building nothing grand, only balance. The circle breathes, the circle remembers, the circle continues. And so the story that began 200,000 years ago in a small band of people who chose one another over solitude has never truly ended. It has only grown wider, softer, deeper, carrying every laugh, every tear, every wonder, every gentle reaching out that has happened since. You are still inside that circle. Every time you share a moment of quiet understanding with another person, every time you offer without counting the cost, every time you pause to let someone catch up, you walk the same path they walked. The first human band is not a distant memory. It is the living rhythm beneath every heartbeat you have ever felt. Rest here with them now. Let the warmth of the sun and the warmth of bodies close together hold you completely. Feel how the sharing that kept them alive through every change still keeps the world turning in its gentlest possible way. The valley is quiet, the sky is endless, the circle is whole. Thank you for resting here with this long, gentle telling of where we all began. Please let us know in the comments where you are watching this history video from and what time it is where you are. And be sure to subscribe to our channel for more calm history stories that help you relax and drift into peaceful sleep. Your quiet support means the circle keeps growing. Sleep softly whenever you are ready. The story will always be waiting, patient and unbroken, right here for you.